Now let's dive deep into this big LGBTQ story for today. I'm Faye Watt, and let's queer up entertainment. Eddie Murphy and Mel B's child, Angel Brown, comes out as transgender. In a heartfelt and quiet
that gives you a certain level of gravitas as well. Is that Will Smith know the story I have not told, So it keeps everybody honest, Eddie Murphy know what I haven't said, you see?
Look in the camera and say.
Katt Williams has made a comment that's now tied to Eddie Murphy's son, and things have quickly turned into a storm online. After reports and social media claims that Murphy's son has come out publicly, the conversation has only gotten louder, with emotions running high around it. In this video, we look at what's being said and why Katt Williams has suddenly been pulled into the middle of the buzz.
Hey, I was trying to go a different way because the whole thing is, what bothered me is the fact.
But before we get to the bigger picture, who is this person Katt Williams has made claims about? Angel Murphy Brown's story is one of fame, family history, and a deeply personal journey that unfolded quietly, but still caught the attention of the public. He was born on April 3, 2007, to two very well-known figures in entertainment, Eddie Murphy and former Spice Girls member Melanie Brown, widely known as Mel B. Their relationship was short-lived in 2006, but it led to the birth of their only child together. From the very beginning, Angel's life was surrounded by public attention. Before he was even born, there was already tension and speculation in the media about who his father was. Eddie Murphy initially questioned the paternity publicly, which created a storm in entertainment news at the time. It became a major talking point, with interviews, headlines, and commentary everywhere. That situation eventually settled when a DNA test confirmed that Murphy was indeed the father in 2007. After that confirmation, the legal and emotional tension between the parents slowly cooled down. Over time, something more stable formed between them. Even though their romantic relationship did not continue, they eventually found common ground as co-parents. Years later, both sides were able to move past the early drama and focus on raising their child in a more peaceful and respectful way. As Angel grew up, he lived a life that was partly connected to fame, but also carefully protected from it. Unlike many children of celebrities, he was not pushed into the spotlight. There were no constant interviews, no reality shows, and no public career built around his last name. Instead, he had space to grow up more privately, with education and personal development taking priority. Then came a major personal milestone in mid-2025. Shortly after turning 18, Angel made a quiet but meaningful update to his social media profile. There was no big announcement, no media event, and no staged interview. He simply updated his personal information to reflect his identity as a transgender man and began using he/him pronouns. It was a simple action on the surface, but for those who noticed, it carried deep meaning. It was his way of stepping into adulthood on his own terms, choosing honesty and self-definition without turning it into a public spectacle. What stood out most in this moment was the reaction from his family.
We're connected, but we're all part of this bigger thing, and I think that thing that connects us, that never dies. I think that's just goes on. And
has the right to parent how they want to parent. So there is no right or wrong, but I don't think you should start too young.
Both Eddie Murphy and Mel B were reported to be fully supportive of their son. There were no public disputes, no confusion played out in the media, and no distance between them. Instead, what emerged was quiet support behind the scenes. People close to the family described it as straightforward acceptance. Angel's decision was not treated as a controversy inside the home. It was treated as a personal truth that his family respected. That kind of response became part of why the story spread online, even without a formal announcement. Today, Angel lives a life that is intentionally separate from the entertainment industry his parents are known for. He is currently focused on education and personal growth. He is described as someone who spends time learning independently, exploring subjects like languages and cultural studies. Rather than following a public career path, he appears more interested in building knowledge and experience at his own pace. Alongside academics, he also spends time on creative and technical interests. Reports from those close to the family suggest he enjoys working with technology, including coding and digital design. He is said to have an eye for visual creativity, especially when it comes to digital spaces and design ideas. Still, these remain private passions rather than professional pursuits. He is not trying to turn them into fame or public branding. Unlike many celebrity children who enter modeling, acting, or social media influence, Angel has chosen a quieter direction. He he is not trying to build a public persona. Instead, he is focused on independence, learning, and shaping an identity that does not depend on his parents' fame. Even with this private approach, his name still circulates in public discussions from time to time. That is partly because of his parents' fame, but also because of the history attached to the family. One major reason the family continues to be discussed is the early controversy surrounding Angel's birth. When Mel B announced her pregnancy, the situation quickly became public and messy. Eddie Murphy's public doubts at the time created a media storm that followed all of them for years. Even after the DNA confirmation and legal resolution, the story stayed in public memory as one of Hollywood's more dramatic paternity disputes. Because of that history, the family has often been viewed through a lens of past tension and later reconciliation. Over time, however, that image has shifted. Many now see them as an example of how co-parenting can evolve after conflict, especially when both sides eventually choose maturity over ongoing public arguments. When Angel's transition became known in 2025, it added a new layer to that public narrative. Online discussions quickly grew, and reactions were mixed. Some people focused on Eddie Murphy's past comedy work from the 1980s, where he included jokes that today are widely considered offensive toward LGBTQ+ communities.
I did jokes about I did jokes about homosexuals about a couple years ago, and faggots were mad. They were like, it's nothing like having a nation of fags looking for you. I'd be at parties, there's always 2 or 3 homosexuals at a party, and they'd be standing around looking at you, they'd be looking at everything.
These voices framed Angel's transition in terms of irony or karma, pointing back to those older performances. However, that interpretation is not shared by everyone. Many others push back against that idea, noting that people change over time. Eddie Murphy has long moved away from that early stage of his career and has publicly shown support for his children, including Angel. To many observers, the more important story is not old comedy routines, but how a father responds to his child in real life. There is also a broader internet debate that tends to surround families like this. Some commentators use cases like Angel's to push wider theories about celebrity culture or social trends. They compare different high-profile families and try to turn personal life decisions into larger cultural arguments. This is where Angel's story sometimes gets pulled into conversations that go far beyond his actual life. At the same time, there is another group of voices that focuses on something much simpler and more grounded. They see the situation as an example of healthy family support. In their view, what matters most is that Angel was able to express who he is, and his parents responded with acceptance rather than rejection. They point out that many young people do not get that kind of support, especially during major personal changes. From that perspective, the family becomes an example of how co-parenting can work even after a difficult history. 2 public figures who once had a conflict managed to set that aside and prioritize their child's well-being. No public arguments, no competing narratives, just private support and respect. Today, Angel continues living away from the spotlight, focusing on his own path. His life is not defined by his parents' fame, even if the public still talks about it from time to time. What stands out most is how quietly he has chosen to live, and how his family has respected that choice. In a world where celebrity lives are often turned into constant public entertainment, his story is different. It is not about performance or attention. It is about identity, privacy, and a young adult trying to build a life that feels like his own. And in the middle of all the noise that surrounds famous families, that part of the story is often the one that gets overlooked the most. Once Angel Murphy Brown's quiet update in June 2025 became public knowledge, it didn't stay quiet for long. What started as a simple change on his social media profile quickly turned into a global talking point, pulled into online debates, cultural commentary, and non-stop social media reactions. Because there was no press conference, no interview circuit, and no media rollout, the initial response was actually calm. For a brief moment, it was just a personal update that reflected how he identified himself. But once blogs, entertainment pages, and news outlets picked it up, the story spread fast. And as always online, once a story reaches that level, it stops being just a personal moment and becomes a public conversation. The reactions split in very clear directions. One of the strongest waves of response came from people who praised how Angel handled it. Many younger users, especially on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, focused on the fact that he didn't turn his life into a media event. To them, that mattered just as much as the transition itself. They saw it as someone choosing privacy over publicity and truth over attention. Instead of interviews or magazine covers, he simply updated his bio. That small action became, in the eyes of many supporters, a powerful statement. It showed that personal identity doesn't need to be packaged for public consumption. You don't need approval from a stage or a headline to live your truth. LGBTQ+ advocates and supportive voices online echoed that same sentiment. A common idea repeated across comment sections was simple. He is living honestly, and he has a family standing behind him. That, for many people, was the part that stood out the most. Not fame, not controversy, but the presence of support in a situation where many young people often feel alone. But as with most celebrity-related stories, the conversation didn't stay in that space for long. A second wave of reaction quickly shifted toward Eddie Murphy's past.
I can't travel the country freely no more. I can't go to San Francisco. They got a 24-hour homo watch waiting for me in the airport. As soon as I got off the plane, they'd be like, he's here, yes, it's him, yes, it's him.
This is where things became more heated and complicated online. Many others pushed back strongly against that interpretation. Fans of Eddie Murphy pointed out that his career has lasted decades, and like many comedians from that era, his early material reflects a time when comedy standards were very different. More importantly, they highlighted how he has publicly distanced himself from that material in later years, describing parts of it as immature and uninformed. But beyond past interviews and statements, what stood out most to defenders was something more immediate: his response as a father. Instead of distancing himself from his child or avoiding the topic, Murphy was reported to have offered direct support. For many people watching the situation unfold, that mattered more than anything he said on a stage 40 years ago. Still, online spaces rarely stay balanced for long. Another major thread of discussion came from a more political direction. Some commentators, especially from conservative corners of the internet, used Angel's story as part of a broader argument about celebrity culture. They claimed they were noticing a pattern among high-profile families and used that to build theories about influence, trends, and media messaging. These arguments often shifted away from Angel as a person and moved toward larger cultural debates. Why do some celebrity children come out publicly? Is it influence, visibility, or something else entirely? These questions were thrown around constantly, often without much grounding in the actual details of his life. In response, many users pushed back again, pointing out something simple that often gets lost in these discussions. Angel is an adult making his own decisions. At 18, he wasn't speaking through a manager, a studio, or a publicist. He was making a personal update in a private space, which only became public because of how the internet works today. That reminder helped shift parts of the conversation back toward a more grounded view, even if only temporarily. Then there was a completely different reaction happening at the same time, and it was surprisingly light compared to everything else. A lot of casual internet users weren't even focused on the transition itself. Instead, they were reacting to the family connection. Many people were shocked or even amused to discover that Eddie Murphy and Mel B had a child together in the first place. Because their relationship and the paternity dispute happened nearly 2 decades earlier, a large portion of younger users had no idea about that history.
You don't know whose child that is till it comes out and has a blood test.
For them, the bigger surprise wasn't the update in 2025. It was realizing that a Spice Girls member and one of Hollywood's most famous comedians shared a son at all. That discovery alone created its own wave of viral comments, memes, and reposts, separate from the main discussion. So while the internet was debating, arguing, and analyzing, another group was just learning the backstory for the first time. Through all of this noise, one thing stayed consistent in most serious discussions. The focus eventually returned to the family itself. Despite the early public drama surrounding Angel's birth, the custody tensions, and the media attention that followed, both parents were widely recognized for having settled into a more stable and supportive co-parenting dynamic over the years. Whatever history existed between them, it did not define how they approached their child's adulthood. And that became one of the quieter but more important parts of the entire conversation. Behind all the online arguments and cultural debates, there was a young adult simply trying to live life privately, and 2 parents choosing not to turn that moment into a public battle. There was no wave of talk show monologues, no back-and-forth interviews, and no celebrity taking sides moment. In fact, the overall reaction from Hollywood and the music industry was surprisingly restrained. Most public figures seemed to take a step back and treat it as a family matter, not entertainment news. A big reason for that is simple. Angel didn't turn his transition into a media rollout. There were no magazine exclusives, no televised interviews, and no publicity campaign attached to it. He updated his personal information quietly, and the people around him mostly followed that tone. the entertainment industry, which often feeds on big emotional headlines, didn't have much to work with in terms of spectacle. So instead of noise, what you saw was something closer to silence mixed with private support. Behind the scenes, there were still reactions, of course, but they stayed in the places where they were meant to stay. Private messages, quiet conversations, and small gestures of support that never became public statements. Among people connected to Mel B's music world, the response was described as warm but low-key. Friends and former colleagues didn't turn it into a public campaign. Instead, they showed support in subtle ways, like interactions on social media or personal outreach that didn't get turned into headlines. It matched the overall tone of the situation. Keep it respectful, keep it personal, don't turn it into a show. In Hollywood circles more broadly, a similar pattern showed up. Many industry voices simply chose not to comment publicly at all, and that silence wasn't cold or dismissive. It was more like recognition that this wasn't something to form opinions about. Some entertainment commentators drew comparisons between Eddie Murphy's response and other well-known Hollywood fathers who have publicly supported their children in similar situations. One name that often came up in those discussions was Robert De Niro, especially in relation to his public support for his daughter Erin.
Want them to the way you'd imagine them to turn out, so you have to be prepared for that with everything, the whole situation, and all the kids, like it's just different, and you got to be ready for it.
The comparison wasn't about drama or controversy, but about a broader shift in how some older Hollywood figures approach family life today. The idea being discussed wasn't about fame, but about evolution. How some parents in the public eye are now more likely to respond with quiet acceptance instead of public statements or defensive interviews. In that sense, Murphy's reported private support for Angel was seen as part of a wider pattern rather than a standalone headline moment. But while real celebrity reactions stayed mostly calm and private, the internet didn't behave the same way. In reality, there has been no public backlash from major comedians or established figures in the comedy world toward Angel or his family. Most professionals in that space stayed completely out of it. No statements, no interviews, no commentary. What existed instead was something much more ordinary. People outside the situation inventing conflict because conflict performs well online. This is where the gap between real life and internet storytelling becomes very clear. On one side, you have a young adult making a personal decision quietly, supported by family, with most public figures choosing to stay respectful and silent. On the other side, you have a digital environment that often turns silence into a blank canvas for speculation, exaggeration, or outright fabrication. In real life, the response was measured: private support, minimal public commentary, and a general understanding that this was a family matter. Online, however, the story expanded into something far louder than what actually existed, fueled by recycled narratives, cultural debates, and algorithm-driven content designed to attract attention. But when you strip all of that away, what remains is still the same core reality that started it all. Angel chose to live openly and quietly in his identity. His family reportedly supported him without turning it into a public event. And most of the entertainment industry, rather than turning it into a spectacle, simply stepped aside. In a media world that usually thrives on controversy, the most unusual part of this story might be how little drama actually came from the people closest to it. However, Katt Williams has built a very specific reputation in entertainment over the years. To many people, he is not just a comedian. He is seen as someone who talks in a way most celebrities avoid. He often speaks in interviews like someone pulling back a curtain, pointing at how the industry works behind closed doors. Because of that, he is sometimes described as a whistleblower-type figure in comedy culture. Not because everything he says is confirmed, but because he tends to speak openly about power, control, and the darker side of fame in Hollywood.
I know that's dangerous, huh? Eureka Gardens!
In recent years, this reputation has only grown stronger online. Whenever there is a major celebrity story, clips of Katt Williams often resurface. People replay old interviews where he talks about Hollywood power structures, gatekeeping, and how fame can be controlled by powerful industry networks. Some viewers treat these clips as truth-telling. Others see them as exaggeration or performance. But either way, he stays part of the conversation. In early 2026, Williams again drew attention after making vague comments in interviews suggesting he has historical information or behind-the-scenes knowledge about major Hollywood figures, including names like Eddie Murphy. He did not present specific evidence or detailed claims, but the tone of his remarks implied that he had seen or heard things about how the industry operates at a deeper level. He also spoke in broad terms about Hollywood politics, power dynamics, and what he described as gatekeeping behavior in the entertainment world. These kinds of statements are not new to him. Over the years, he has repeatedly positioned himself as someone willing to say what others are afraid to say, even if it creates backlash or controversy. Because of this, his name often gets pulled into online discussions about other celebrities, even when there is no direct connection. That includes conversations about Eddie Murphy's family, Angel Murphy Brown's personal life, and broader debates about Hollywood culture. Supporters of Katt Williams believe he is describing real, emotional, and psychological pressure inside the industry. They see his interviews as a form of honesty about how fame can affect people, especially black celebrities who may already feel watched more closely or judged more harshly in public spaces. Critics, however, argue that his statements often cross into speculation. They say he mixes real industry frustrations with unverified claims and dramatic storytelling. In their view, his interviews should be understood more as commentary or performance rather than factual reporting. This tension is part of why his name stays constantly in circulation online. People don't fully agree on how to interpret him, so every new interview becomes fuel for debate. When his comments are placed next to real-life situations involving celebrities like Eddie Murphy or his son Angel, the internet often tries to connect dots that may not actually be connected. A personal family story becomes linked to wider cultural theories. A comedian's interview becomes treated like hidden evidence, and a private moment gets pulled into public narratives that grow far beyond the original situation. In reality, there is no verified link between Katt Williams' general commentary and the personal lives of Eddie Murphy's family. The overlap exists mostly because of timing and internet culture, not because of direct involvement. Still, his presence in these conversations shows something important about how modern celebrity news works. It is no longer just about what people do or say directly. It is also about how older interviews, resurfaced clips, and online interpretations get blended into one ongoing story. That is why Katt Williams remains a recurring figure in discussions like this. Not because he is actively involved, but because he represents a certain type of voice in entertainment, one that challenges the industry, questions authority, and speaks in a way that invites both belief and skepticism at the same time. And in the middle of all these overlapping narratives, from family privacy to public reaction to industry commentary, the truth often gets quieter than the conversation around it. Eddie Murphy is one of the most important figures in modern American entertainment, known for shaping stand-up comedy and Hollywood comedy films for more than 4 decades. He first broke into the spotlight in the early 1980s as a young cast member on Saturday Night Live, where his sharp humor and confidence quickly made him a standout. That early success opened the door to a career that would soon move far beyond television. His stand-up specials, especially Delirious and Raw, became cultural milestones. These performances didn't just make audiences laugh, they changed what stand-up comedy could look like on a global stage. Raw in particular became the highest-grossing stand-up comedy film ever made, cementing his status as a comedy giant. From there, Murphy transitioned into movies and became a box office powerhouse. Films like Beverly Hills Cop, Trading Places, Coming to America, and The Nutty Professor turned him into one of the biggest movie stars of his era. He had a rare ability to carry both comedy and storytelling at the same time, often playing multiple characters in a single film and still making each one feel distinct. He also expanded into voice acting, reaching a new generation of fans. His role as Donkey in the Shrek franchise became one of the most recognizable animated characters in film history, while his work as Mushu in Disney's Mulan added to his legacy in animation. Over the years, Murphy also earned critical recognition. He received a Golden Globe Award, an Academy Award nomination for his performance in Dreamgirls, and later the prestigious Mark Twain Prize for American Humor in 2015, which honors major contributions to comedy. Outside of his career, Murphy is also a father to 10 children from different relationships. Among them is his son Angel Murphy Brown, whom he co-parents with singer Melanie Brown, known globally as Mel B. Despite a complicated early public history, their focus in later years has been centered on stable co-parenting and family support. Today, Murphy's legacy is often described as layered: a comedy pioneer, a film star, and a father whose personal life has remained in the public eye alongside his long career. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update.